August 1943. Dawn breaks over a nameless Pacific shoreline. Dense green pressing down to the surf. The air hums with insects and the distant crack of naval guns. Through the smoke, gray silhouettes move. Landing craft nosing onto the beach. Ramps clanging open. Bulldozers growling out first. Their treads sinking deep into the mud. Rain begins to fall. Within minutes, Marines in soaked fatigues are marking zones with red flags. Naval engineers unroll steel matting straight into the swamp. Crates of food, ammunition, and fuel drums rise from the surf line like small monuments. By nightfall, generators thrum, radio masts stand, and a kitchen is already serving coffee under a poncho roof. 48 hours later, where jungle once stood, lights burn through the rain. A hospital tent, a command shack, a graded runway glistening in torchlight. From a ridge above, a Japanese patrol halts in disbelief. The Americans had not just landed. They had built a city. The question that stunned every enemy observer now takes center stage. How did they build the impossible this fast? The Pacific War was not a line on a map. It was a vast, living ocean, stretching from the fog of Alaska to the coral reefs of the Solomons, from the steaming jungles of New Guinea to the volcanic islands of the Marianas. In this arena, there were no roads, no rails, and almost no cities. Every battle began the same way, with nothing. To the soldiers and sailors of both sides, this emptiness was both enemy and opportunity. Japan's early victories, from the Philippines to Malaya, had proven the power of pre-built bases and fast occupation. But the deeper the Imperial Army pushed, the longer its supply lines stretched, and the fewer harbors it could defend. For the Allies, especially the Americans, the lesson was immediate and brutal. Whoever could build faster would win the Pacific. When the U.S. entered the war after Pearl Harbor, its forces lacked permanent footholds west of Hawaii. The Navy had ships, but no nearby repair yards. The Marines had men, but no airstrips or storage once they landed. Early operations were painfully slow, choked by jungle, coral, and disease. Bulldozers bogged down, supplies piled on beaches, and medical units fought malaria more than the enemy. Something had to change. In 1942, the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks approved a radical idea. Construction battalions of trained tradesmen who could build under fire. Electricians, welders, plumbers, riggers, road builders, and surveyors would now wear combat boots and carry rifles. They called themselves Seabees, from the initials CB for Construction Battalion. Their mission was brutally simple: land behind the Marines, and make civilization appear where none existed. Under the command of Admiral Ben Moriel, the Seabees began forming by the tens of thousands. Their average age was 37, old for combat, but they were veterans of another kind. Men who'd built bridges, railways, and refineries in the Great Depression. What they lacked in youth, they made up for in speed and skill. Each new amphibious plan now had two halves: the assault and the build. The Marines would take the ground. The Seabees would turn it into a fortress. But to do that, they needed doctrine, a new choreography of men, machines, and timing. Naval engineers and marine logisticians designed shore parties, small organized groups that managed the chaos of landings. Every jeep, bulldozer, and barrel had a designated place. Every hour had an assigned task. Landing ship, tanks, LSTs, became their lifeline. Each could carry 20 medium tanks or hundreds of tons of supplies directly onto a beach, lowering its ramp and disgorging a rolling wave of vehicles. Smaller craft, like LCTs and LCMs, followed, ferrying construction gear and medical units. Ashore. Then came the innovation that would shrink time itself: pontoon. Causeways and Marston matting Seabees assembled floating steel platforms from interlocking pontoons, creating instant docks where none existed. From there, they could unload trucks, cranes, and graders directly onto land. On the shore, they laid down pierced steel planking, metal mats linked like armor scales, turning swamp into runway overnight. Rain or no rain, coral or mud, Within 24 hours, a beach could accept aircraft and supply trucks. The Japanese, steeped in older patterns of warfare, could not comprehend the speed of this transformation. To them, a base took months of manual labor and convoys of material. For the Americans, it became a 48-hour routine. Industrial war stripped of delay, and the first full-scale test of that doctrine, the one that would define everything that followed, came in the dark waters of the Solomon Islands. It began with an island name barely known outside naval charts, Guadalcanal. By August 1942, Japan was building an airfield there, a dirt strip on a ridge called Lunga Point. If finished, it would threaten Allied shipping across the South Pacific. The U.S. had to stop it. But when the Marines landed, they faced not only Japanese resistance, but nature itself. Thick jungle, relentless heat, sudden rains, and malaria that could empty a battalion. Every crate of supplies had to be hauled by hand through the mud. Bulldozers were scarce, and engineers had to scavenge abandoned Japanese trucks for parts. Still, they worked, and in the process, they learned the tempo of the Pacific, a rhythm that turned chaos into method, and method into victory. That rhythm, first beaten out in the mud of Guadalcanal, would echo across the ocean for 3 long years. The first test of the build fast or lose doctrine came at Guadalcanal, August 7, 1942. The first major U.S. offensive of the Pacific War. The target was a half-finished Japanese airfield on a humid jungle ridge overlooking the sea, a place the enemy called Lunga Point. If the Japanese completed it, they could cut the sea lanes between America and Australia. The Marines landed under a shroud of early morning mist. The Japanese defenders were light but determined, retreating into the jungle as the Americans seized the airstrip. To the Marines' shock, they discovered hundreds of tons of construction gear, shovels, fuel drums, graders, all abandoned by the Japanese engineers. The enemy had been days away from finishing a base that could dominate the southern Pacific. Within hours, American engineers and Seabees began working on it themselves. They named it Henderson Field, after Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at Midway. But the jungle fought back harder than the enemy. Torrential rains washed away ditches. Tropical diseases spread through the ranks. Malaria, dysentery, dengue. Bulldozers bogged down and supply convoys failed to arrive. For weeks, Marines fought on half rations, their uniforms rotting in the humidity. Every gallon of gasoline, every ration tin, every bullet had to be landed under Japanese air attack from Rabaul. Yet the building never stopped. Day and night, engineers scraped, graded, and drained the land. Airstrips were leveled with coral and crushed stone, tamped down by hand rollers when machinery failed. Bulldozer operators worked shirtless in the heat, often under strafing runs, their machines armored only with sandbags. By August 20th, just 13 days after the landing, the first American aircraft, F-4F Wildcats and SBD Dauntless dive bombers, roared off Henderson's new runway. The island was no longer a patch of jungle. It was an airbase. That airbase became the heart of the Cactus Air Force, a ragged mix of Marine, Navy, and Army flyers who defended Guadalcanal for months against relentless Japanese attacks. Every supply barge sunk, every night bombardment survived, owed its outcome to that dirt strip and the men who kept it usable. Each morning, while fighters took off, Seabees patched craters with crushed coral and filled in bomb holes. Each night, they expanded the perimeter, fuel dumps, maintenance bays, and field hospitals spreading through the jungle. Behind the front lines, more miracles happened quietly. Field kitchens were improvised from oil drums. Wells were dug. A primitive power grid appeared, running lights for the first time in the island's history. Japanese intelligence reports struggled to understand it. Their scouts expected to find a small beachhead. Instead, reconnaissance aircraft photographed what looked like a fully functioning airfield complex, hangars, camps, and artillery emplacements in less than 3 weeks. That revelation altered Japanese planning. Commanders realized they faced not only soldiers, but a mobile industrial machine, For the Americans, Guadalcanal proved that victory wasn't just about winning battles. It was about outbuilding the enemy. By 1943, this lesson hardened into a system. Every invasion force now included integrated engineer amphibian brigades and Seabee battalions. Every ship carried pre-packed cargo, power plants, bridge sections, water distillation units, and modular hospitals, all numbered and labeled for rapid unloading. The Pacific had become an engineering battlefield, and the United States was learning to fight it with blueprints, cranes, and bulldozers. The next campaigns, through the Gilberts and Marshalls, would show how this new rhythm of war could turn coral atolls into fortresses overnight. Each operation would push the limits of what men and machines could achieve under fire. And nowhere would this transformation astonish the enemy more than on a small island called Tarawa, where Marines would face one of the bloodiest landings in history, and the Seabees would build a functioning airstrip from ruin in less than 48 hours. The human angle, sweat, skill, and survival. The Pacific War was not only a contest of machines, but of endurance. The Seabees and Marines who turned jungles into bases lived in a world of mud, heat, and exhaustion. They were not professional soldiers in the traditional sense. Many were construction foremen, miners, or mechanics before the war. Yet when they hit the beaches, they became part of the front line. Men worked shirtless in blinding sun, skin burned raw, eyes stung by salt and diesel smoke. They slept beside their machines and ate standing up. Tropical sores festered, boots rotted. Mosquitoes covered every inch of exposed skin. They fought two enemies, the Japanese and the jungle, but their morale was iron. They carved slogans into bulldozer blades. "This ends today. Tokyo Express, stop here." They joked that the Navy gave them the world's biggest construction job, and they meant it. On islands like Bougainville or Kwajalein, Seabees built under artillery fire, refusing to stop even when shell fragments ripped through their fuel tanks. Their battle rhythm was simple: work fast or die slow. The tactical angle, shore party precision. Every landing zone was chaos. Waves of landing craft, smoke, and gunfire. Yet within hours a strange order appeared. The shore party was the invisible brain behind it. These teams combined Marines, Seabees, and Navy beachmasters who directed landing traffic like air controllers on a runway. They used colored flags, bullhorns, and radio codes to separate vehicles and prioritize cargo. Ammunition, fuel, and food each had their sector. Bulldozers carved access roads even as shells fell nearby. The entire process was timed like choreography. Hour 03. Secure perimeter. Mark lanes, land bulldozers, and power equipment. Hour 3 to 12. Build dumps, water points, and casualty collection stations. Hour 12 to 24. Begin airstrip grading or pier construction. By the second day, a rough infrastructure, a city without walls, existed. The Japanese might shell it, but the rhythm continued. The Seabees joked that every shell just loosened more soil for the next runway. It was logistics as combat, and it turned every beach into a working machine. The technological angle, tools, that won the jungle speed demanded invention. The Americans' technological edge wasn't in exotic weapons, but in modularity and power. The bulldozer, particularly the Caterpillar D7, became the symbol of the Seabees. With armor plating and steel push blades, it could clear trees faster than explosives. Engineers modified cranes into jungle spiders, lifting entire trucks from swamp pits. Portable rock crushers chewed coral into airfield material. The most revolutionary tool was Marston matting, officially called pierced steel planking, PSP. Each 10-foot sheet interlocked with another, allowing men to lay hundreds of meters of runway in hours. Even on coral or swamp, aircraft could land within a day. Pontoon barges, too, changed everything. Shipped flat, assembled by hand, they became floating docks, piers, and even bridges, the backbone of every supply operation. In the Pacific, Where every island lacked a harbor, these innovations turned engineering into warfare. The enemy dug caves. The Americans built cities. The combination of manpower, precision, and machine power created something new in history: the logistics of instant occupation. And as this system evolved, it began to reveal deeper layers of leadership, enemy psychology, and the moral price of building under constant fire. The leadership angle: visionaries of speed. Behind the roar of bulldozers and the sweat of men stood a handful of leaders who understood that war could be won with blueprints as surely as bullets. Foremost among them was Admiral Ben Moriel, chief of the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks, the man who created the Seabees. Moriel realized that the Pacific's greatest obstacle was not Japanese firepower, but geography itself. The ocean offered no fixed front lines, only shifting dots of coral and jungle that had to be turned into bases overnight. Moriel's idea was revolutionary: merge the industrial skill of civilian labor with the discipline of the Navy. Each construction battalion would fight and build simultaneously, landing within hours of the assault troops. He trained commanders to think in hours, not weeks, to measure success by how quickly a runway, dock, or fuel depot became operational. Marine leaders like General Alexander Vandegrift and amphibious commander Admiral Richmond K. Turner adopted this thinking. They saw that every successful landing depended on immediate logistics. Turner called it the second wave that decides the war. Through their vision, the tempo of the Pacific transformed. What had once taken months of fortification now happened in 2 days, and that tempo, faster than the enemy could comprehend, became a weapon of its own. The enemy perspective. Impossible Americans, Japanese soldiers, conditioned to think of war as endurance and patience, could not comprehend what they were seeing. In diary fragments recovered after battles in the Solomons and the Gilberts, officers wrote of their astonishment. In 2 days, the enemy has built a port and an airfield. We believed this impossible. Reconnaissance pilots sent back photographs of new bases sprouting like metal flowers across once empty islands. To Japanese intelligence, it appeared supernatural. Their engineers, bound to manual labor and limited machinery, required months to achieve the same results. This contrast demoralized many garrisons. At Tarawa, soldiers who had survived the bombardment watched through binoculars as Americans, still under shell fire, bulldozed wreckage aside and began laying steel matting before the smoke had cleared. For Japan, whose wartime logistics relied on wooden ships and human labor, the American approach was alien. They had underestimated the power of industrialized warfare, the ability to land a factory on a beach and make it produce in a day. To many observers, this was the moment they realized the war's direction had changed. It was no longer a contest of courage. It was a contest of systems, and the American system was relentless. The moral and medical angle, building under fire, healing under mud. There was a quieter side to this miracle of speed: the human cost. Every new base meant men working in blistering heat under fire, sleeping in swamps crawling with leeches and malaria mosquitoes. Medical units arrived with the first waves, setting up tent hospitals even before runways were complete. They dug drainage ditches to fight malaria, burned garbage to halt dysentery, and distilled seawater for drinking. On some islands, 70% of engineers suffered from tropical fevers. Yet the construction never stopped. Doctors spoke of a new kind of casualty: exhaustion. Men collapsed at their machines, skin cracked from salt and fuel, vision blurred from lack of sleep. Chaplain reports from the 18th Naval Construction Battalion describe men praying for rain just to slow the work. But there was also pride. When Marines or pilots returned from missions, they saw what these exhausted men had built: roads, hangars, hospitals, airstrips glowing at night. It gave purpose to the suffering. This moral endurance, the willingness to build under bombardment, to turn wreckage into shelter, was the invisible foundation of every victory that followed, and it would soon be tested to its breaking point on the blood-soaked beaches of Tarawa, where survival and construction became one and the same. November 20th, 1943. Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll, a strip of coral barely 2 miles long, half a mile wide, and defended by 4,800 Japanese troops. It was the first time in the Pacific War that American forces would assault a heavily fortified island head-on, and the first time Seabees would land within hours of the Marines. The plan was simple on paper: capture Tarawa, secure the beachhead, and turn it into a forward airfield to control the Gilbert Islands. Reality was chaos. When the first landing craft approached the reef, the tide was too low. Hundreds of Marines had to wade through 600 yards of chest-deep water under machine gun fire. Many never made it. The lagoon turned crimson. Wrecked Amtraks burned along the reef. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and oil. For 3 days, the battle raged street by street, trench by trench. By the end, only 17 Japanese defenders were captured alive. The rest fought to the death. When the guns finally fell silent, the island looked like the surface of another planet. Blackened palms, wrecked tanks, craters filled with seawater and bodies. It was here, amid this devastation, that the Seabees began their impossible task. The first bulldozers. Within hours of the final assault, the 18th Naval Construction Battalion landed. Their first sight of Betio was wreckage, coral torn apart, corpses buried under rubble, fuel fires still burning. And yet, as one engineer later recalled, "We had 48 hours to turn hell into an airfield." They went to work immediately. Bulldozers pushed wrecked tanks and burned landing craft into makeshift seawalls. Corpses were buried where they fell, sometimes covered by sheets of coral. Bulldozers were fitted with steel plates scavenged from wrecked ships for protection against unexploded ordnance. Within 6 hours, the first stretch of the Japanese runway, the same one American bombs had obliterated, was being cleared and leveled. Men worked in shifts of 2 hours, collapsing from heat and exhaustion, but refusing to stop. At night, searchlights from LSTs lit the battlefield as graders and tractors roared. The coral dust mixed with smoke until the air shimmered like fog. Marines resting nearby said it sounded like the island itself was rebuilding. By dawn of the second day, reconnaissance aircraft buzzed overhead, guiding engineers to the least damaged portions of the old strip. Using Marston matting, Seabees laid a new steel runway over bomb craters still warm from explosions. The clanging of hammers echoed through the silence of the dead. At exactly 76 hours after the first landing, the first American plane, a Marine F-4U Corsair, touched down on Betio's rebuilt airfield. The pilot's landing signal was simple. He cut his engine, saluted the Seabees, and shouted, "You did it!" Shockwaves. Across the Pacific, when reports of Tarawa reached Japan, disbelief turned to dread. Japanese military observers had predicted it would take the Americans at least a month to make the island usable. They had fortified Betio to make it impregnable. Yet within 3 days of its capture, American aircraft were taking off from the same runway. The Japanese Imperial General Staff's intelligence summary for December 1943 read, "Enemy speed of construction surpasses expectation. Immediate airfield operation after occupation is a new phenomenon." For the Americans, Tarawa was more than a victory. It was proof that the 48-hour doctrine worked. Despite catastrophic losses, the system held beachmasters, shore parties, Seabees, and Marines operating as one synchronized organism. From that point forward, every operation, Kwajalein, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima followed the same template. The Marines would take the island. The Seabees would turn it into a city. The human toll Tarawa's cost was staggering. Out of 18,000 Marines who landed, over 3,000 were killed or wounded. The Seabees suffered heavy losses too. Engineers shot while driving bulldozers. Mechanics killed repairing fuel lines under sniper fire. Yet none withdrew. The commander of the 18th Battalion wrote in his report, "No man asked to stop. The dead were buried, the wounded replaced, and the machines kept moving." Photographs taken just days later showed something extraordinary. Neat rows of tents, fuel drums stacked in pyramids, a control tower made of salvaged wood, and a graded runway stretching across the coral. The transformation was so rapid that correspondents called it a miracle of mud and steel. For Japan, it marked a turning point, a realization that American industrial power could rebuild faster than they could destroy. And as the island filled with new aircraft and supplies, the next great test loomed, one far larger, darker, and more volcanic than Tarawa, Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945. The Pacific War had entered its final, most brutal phase. After the capture of the Marianas, American B-29 superfortresses were striking the Japanese mainland directly from bases on Saipan and Tinian. But the distance, over 1,500 miles, meant crippled bombers often ditched at sea before reaching safety. To shorten that gap, one volcanic island stood in the way: Iwo Jima. Barely 8 square miles of black ash and sulfur vents, it was defended by more than 21,000 Japanese troops entrenched in tunnels and pillboxes carved into solid rock. For the Marines and Seabees, this would be no tropical clearing operation. It would be a construction project inside a battlefield. The invasion begins at 09:00 a.m. Waves of Marines stormed the beaches beneath Mount Suribachi. The sand, actually volcanic grit, swallowed their boots and bogged every vehicle. Within minutes, the carefully timed landing plan dissolved into chaos. Flamethrowers roared. Naval guns thundered. The air was a haze of sulfur and smoke. Behind the assault waves, the first Seabee detachments came ashore, dragging bulldozers wrapped in canvas and waterproofed generators. They knew their mission before setting foot: open Motoyama Airfield No. 1 within days. No matter the cost, it seemed impossible. The terrain was pure ash, loose, powdery, incapable of supporting machinery. Every crater filled with smoke and shifting dust. Shell fragments tore through fuel drums. Engines overheated within minutes. Yet the engineers worked under sniper fire, directing dozers to cut drainage ditches and fill shell holes with crushed rock hauled by hand. By nightfall of the first day, casualties were severe. Many Seabees were forced to use bulldozers as moving shields, pushing ahead while riflemen crouched behind the blades. Their motto, "Can Do," became literal survival, turning hell into an airfield. As the battle for Suribachi raged to the south, the Seabees concentrated on the airfields. 3 Japanese strips existed: Motoyama No. 1, 2, and 3, each cratered by bombs and mined by retreating defenders. Using captured equipment and their own machinery winched from the surf, they began grading the first usable runway on February 24th, just 5 days after the invasion began. Work continued around the clock. At night, the glow of welding torches flickered across the black landscape. By day, smoke from burning bunkers mingled with the dust from graders and rollers. Engineers wore gas masks not for gas, but to keep out the choking ash. On March 4, 1945, as fighting still raged less than a mile away, the first American aircraft, a P-51 Mustang from the 15th Fighter Group, landed on the unfinished strip to refuel. Hours later, a crippled B-29 bomber named Dynamite made an emergency landing. Its crew stumbled out alive, shaking hands with the engineers who had carved the runway from fire. It was the first of 2,400 B-29s that would later use Iwo Jima as an emergency field, saving nearly 27,000 airmen who might otherwise have been lost at sea. A strategic earthquake. The psychological effect was enormous. To the Japanese, Iwo Jima had been advertised as an unbreakable fortress, the threshold to the homeland. Yet within days of its capture, Americans were flying from it. A Tokyo radio broadcast admitted grimly, "The enemy has built an airfield upon our sacred soil." For the Allies, it was vindication of every painful lesson since Guadalcanal. The 48-hour principle had evolved into a doctrine of continuous construction under fire. Bulldozers, engineers, and medical teams landed almost with the first riflemen. Every hour gained meant dozens of lives saved and missions completed. When Admiral Chester Nimitz visited the island weeks later, he summed up what he saw. Among the Americans who served on Iwo Jima, Uncommon valor was a common virtue. That valor extended not only to those who fought, but to those who built, men who turned a volcano into a lifeline. The fall of Iwo Jima marked more than victory. It marked the moment when the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps had perfected the art of instant base creation. From the first beach to operational airfield, the cycle was now counted not in months or weeks, but in days. And as the smoke cleared, the Seabees prepared for what they already knew would come next. The colossal invasion of Okinawa, and beyond it, the Japanese home islands themselves. But before that final act, the world would pause to measure what these feats had cost and what they had made possible. When the smoke of Iwo Jima settled, the pattern of the Pacific War was unmistakable. Everywhere the Marines and Seabees went, the same miracle repeated. In days, a jungle became a base. The formula had hardened into doctrine, a playbook refined through blood, sweat, and experience. By 1944-45, this system had reached its peak on islands with names that once meant nothing. Bougainville, the Russells, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, Leyte. Each became a living diagram of American engineering might. The sequence was precise. Day 1 to 2. Secure the beaches. Unload the dozers. Lay pontoon causeways. Day 3 to 5. Grade airstrips. Erect fuel dumps. Build field hospitals. Day 6 to 10. Raise housing, communication lines, radar towers, docks, and power stations. Within a week, what had been wilderness now looked like a functioning city, complete with streets, signs, and even movie screens made from parachute cloth. Journalists who toured these sites called them islands of order in an ocean of chaos. At Bougainville, Seabees built a 2-lane road from the beach to the mountain ridges in less than a week, under fire, in mud chest deep. At Saipan, they laid a bomber runway long enough for B-29s while fighting snipers in surrounding cane fields. On Tinian, their achievement bordered on the impossible. In 45 days, they turned sugarcane fields into the largest operational airfield complex in the world, North Field, from which the Enola Gay would later take off for Hiroshima. The Japanese soldiers watching from nearby islands sent back stunned radio reports. The enemy builds entire cities where there is only jungle. Their machines never stop. But these cities weren't just functional. They were designed to sustain life. Each had clean water systems, field hospitals, refrigeration units for medical supplies, even chapels and postal stations. Some had makeshift barber shops, libraries, and baseball fields, reminders of a civilization that refused to die in the mud. To the men stationed there, this was proof that America's strength wasn't only in its weapons, it was in its ability to rebuild, anywhere, at any speed. Doctrine of Speed. By mid-1944, Navy planners had formalized the methods used at Guadalcanal and Tarawa into an operational doctrine. Advanced Base Functional Components, ABFCs. Each invasion convoy now carried pre-packed base kits, modular components labeled like puzzle pieces. There was a hospital 100-bed unit, a fuel farm 2,000-barrel set, a pier, medium-duty kit. Everything was numbered, logged, and ready for instant assembly. These ABFCs allowed entire facilities to be built like prefabricated cities. When a new island was captured, Seabees unloaded the necessary kits in order of priority. Power first, then fuel, then water, then housing. The process was so efficient that an operational base could spring up within 48 to 72 hours after the first bulldozer hit the beach. At Leyte Gulf, engineers turned miles of mangrove into supply depots that could refuel entire fleets. At Okinawa, they built the world's busiest airfield while artillery still thundered nearby. Everywhere, the principle remained the same. Speed equals survival. A human machine. By now, more than 325,000 Seabees served across the Pacific. An army of builders who thought like soldiers and worked like industrialists. They operated 60-ton cranes, ran sawmills in the jungle, and repaired bridges with wrecked enemy steel. In 3 years, they built over 100 airstrips, 400 piers, 250 hospitals, and 15,000 miles of roads. Yet few of them saw themselves as heroes. When asked after the war how they managed to build under such impossible conditions, one Seabee foreman simply said, "We didn't have time to think about impossible." That quiet practicality, the belief that there was always a way to build faster, became the spiritual doctrine of the Pacific Campaign. From the jungles of Guadalcanal to the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, this pattern of relentless construction had become more than logistics. It was a way of fighting. It was the rhythm that carried the United States across the Pacific, island by island, until the shadow of Japan itself lay within reach. But what did that rhythm truly cost? In men, in machines, and in meaning? Those answers would emerge in the aftermath, as the war's final islands fell silent, and the world began counting the price of victory. When the guns of the Pacific finally went silent in August 1945, the numbers spoke louder than any victory parade. In 3.5 years, the Navy's Construction Battalions and Marine engineers had built, or rebuilt, more infrastructure than many nations possessed before the war. Their work stretched across 300 islands and 10 million square miles of ocean. The numbers that built a war: 111 major airstrips constructed, from short fighter strips on Coral to 8,500-foot bomber runways on Tinian and Guam. 1 piers and docks, many built from pontoons or captured materials, 1,000 miles of fuel pipelines, pumping aviation gas through jungles and over beaches, 1,000 miles of roads graded and maintained, 50 field hospitals, treating more than 500,000 wounded. Million tons of supplies moved through Seabee-built bases by 1945. Each figure was not just a statistic. It was a measure of time won. Every airstrip built in 48 hours meant bombers could fly sooner. Every dock completed in 2 days meant ships could unload without waiting for tides. Every well dug meant fewer men lost to disease. Speed was no longer a goal. It had become a form of strategy. The power of industrial war Japan had entered the conflict with superior experience in jungle and island warfare, but it fought within a pre-industrial framework. Bases were hand-built, materials scarce, and replacement parts nearly impossible to ship. The United States, by contrast, had turned its entire economy into a mobile workshop. Cargo ships carried not only weapons but entire factories in pieces. Prefabricated sawmills, water plants, machine shops, and power grids. Where Japan's engineers built once and defended forever, the Americans built fast, used it, and moved forward. The Pacific advance became a chain reaction of temporary cities, each one rising, serving, and vanishing as the front shifted. This agility shattered the rhythm of Japanese defense. They could not predict where the next airfield or naval base would appear, only that it would appear sooner than logic allowed. Psychological and strategic consequences captured Japanese officers later admitted their disbelief. In post-war interrogations, several described how the speed of American construction had broken the mind of garrisons still holding isolated islands. One wrote, "Before we finished digging one trench, the enemy had built a harbor." For the Allies, the effect was transformative. Rapid construction meant continuous momentum. No pause, no exhaustion of supply. It allowed Admiral Nimitz to plan overlapping offensives across thousands of miles, each supported by instant air power and repair facilities. By 1945, the Seabee system was so efficient that the United States could project naval and air strength anywhere in the Pacific within 72 hours of landing. The Pacific Ocean, once a barrier, had become a highway. That advantage saved countless lives. The emergency fields on Iwo Jima alone rescued 27,000 B-29 crewmen who would otherwise have perished at sea. Portable hospitals on Okinawa treated 60,000 casualties in their first 2 weeks. Even food, freshly refrigerated thanks to Seabee-built cold storage units, helped sustain morale among troops thousands of miles from home. The hidden cost yet behind every statistic lay cost in sweat and blood. More than 500 Seabees and thousands of Marine engineers were killed in action. Many died not from bullets but from exhaustion, accidents, disease, and heat stroke. Bulldozers buried friends beside finished airstrips. Some bases were built directly atop battlefields where bodies still lay beneath the coral. But there was little time for reflection. The war moved on, and the builders moved with it. When peace came, the Seabees dismantled many of their creations. Piers were left to rust. Fuel drums were buried. Runways became overgrown by vines. The jungle reclaimed its ground. But the legacy remained invisible. The knowledge that human hands could remake the earth in days. A legacy beyond the war. The same methods that built Pacific bases would later rebuild the world. In the late 1940s and 50s, veterans of the Seabees became engineers, contractors, and planners for the Marshall Plan and the post-war boom. Many of the techniques, modular housing, prefabricated bridges, rapid deployment power systems, were born in the mud of Guadalcanal and refined on Iwo Jima. Even the modern concept of combat engineering owes its lineage to those first men who landed with rifles and blueprints. The Pacific was won not only by courage, but by the ability to build faster than destruction itself. As the war's final reports were filed, Admiral Moriel wrote a single sentence to the Bureau of Yards and Docks. "What we have built in this war is not only bases, it is proof that organization and will can move mountains." And yet, the story of those mountains, of jungle turned to city, would only truly be understood years later, when historians realized the full scale of what had been accomplished in those 48 hours at a time. The war ended, but the echo of engines never truly faded. In the vast silence that followed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Pacific Islands, once jungles and battlefields, stood as monuments of human will. Their airstrips, piers, and rusting bulldozers told a quiet story. That civilization, when cornered by destruction, had learned how to rebuild itself overnight. Those 48-hour miracles were not just feats of engineering. They were acts of defiance. Against distance, against chaos, against the limits of time itself. Each Seabee who dug coral under shell fire, each Marine who marked the landing zone with a strip of red cloth, believed in one simple truth: that survival depended on creation. To build was to live another day. The Japanese soldiers who once watched in disbelief were witnessing more than industrial power. They were seeing the arrival of a new kind of warfare, one in which speed and structure replaced trenches and stalemates. The age of the factory had come to the battlefield. Yet beneath the triumph lay a deeper reflection. These instant cities were both a marvel and a warning. They showed how quickly humanity could reshape the earth, and how easily it could normalize the unnatural. Jungle, coral, and coastline became extensions of industry. Nature yielded to grids and generators, and the line between necessity and domination blurred. Still, for those who built them, these places carried something sacred. They were proof that order could rise from ruin, that men armed with wrenches and courage could change the course of history. In every steel plank laid under rain, in every runway glowing through tropical mist, there was the quiet heartbeat of persistence. The same force that would one day rebuild Europe's cities, launch rockets, and pave continents. The Pacific Campaign ended with victory, but its greatest legacy was not conquest. It was the revelation that civilization's strength lies not in destruction, but in reconstruction, in the hands that build even when the world burns around them. And somewhere, beneath the vines and coral, the ghosts of those cities still sleep, waiting for the sound of engines and the men who once built a world from jungle in just 48 hours. In every forgotten island, in every rusting bulldozer buried beneath the vines, the echoes of those men still live, the builders who made victory possible. If their story moved you, help it reach more people who've never heard it. Like this film to honor their legacy. Subscribe to keep their history alive, and share it, so others may know how a handful of engineers built a city from jungle in just 48 hours.